The moment that changed everything. The white walls of the hospital glowed under the morning light. The faint sound of machines filled the quiet corridor. Every second ticked slowly, heavy with fear and memories. A nurse walked past, carrying a tray, while the air smelled faintly of medicine and hope. Behind one of the doors, Keanu lay still, his eyes half open, his thoughts drifting between pain and peace. He had always been strong. To the world, he was the man who smiled even through storms. But that morning, as sunlight touched his face, he felt fragile. His heart was heavy with memories he tried to forget. He thought about the accidents, the losses, and the endless years of silence. He wondered if kindness ever came back to those who gave it freely. He wanted to believe it did, but the loneliness in that sterile room whispered otherwise. The doctors had said he needed rest. They said he had pushed himself too far. Exhaustion, both physical and emotional, had finally caught up. The shooting schedule had been long, the travel endless, and the weight inside him had become too much to carry. Yet even now he didn't complain. He only stared at the ceiling, thinking about all the faces that had come and gone in his life. Then the door opened softly. He didn't turn right away. He thought it was another nurse checking his pulse, but the footsteps were careful, familiar, and slow. A scent followed them. Something warm, something he hadn't felt in years. His heart trembled before his eyes moved, and when he finally looked, time seemed to stop. It was Sandra. She stood near the door, her hands clutching a bouquet of white lilies. Her eyes searched for his, trembling with emotion she couldn't hide. The years between them melted in a single moment. She had seen him strong, she had seen him silent, but she had never seen him like this. Pale, tired, and utterly human. Keanu tried to speak, but his throat felt dry. His lips parted, yet no sound came out. His eyes glistened, the weight of everything they had never said pressing against his chest. She walked closer, step by step, as if afraid that moving too fast would break something sacred. "Hey," she whispered, her voice barely holding steady. "You didn't think I'd stay away, did you?" The silence between them carried more meaning than words ever could. She placed the flowers beside his bed and pulled a chair closer. For a moment, she just looked at him, not the actor, not the legend, but the man who had once made her laugh so hard, she forgot her pain. Now she was the one holding back tears. "You shouldn't have come," he finally said, his voice low and broken. "Don't say that," she replied softly. "I wanted to. I needed to." He looked away, staring at the window where sunlight painted slow shapes on the curtain. "I didn't want anyone to see me like this," he murmured. "Especially you." She smiled sadly, her eyes glistening. "You've seen me at my worst too, remember?" she said. "You never looked away." The room felt smaller as her words reached him. He closed his eyes for a moment, and a tear slipped down his cheek. It wasn't from pain, but from something deeper. The feeling of being seen when he no longer felt visible. Sandra reached out, gently holding his hand. Her touch was warm, steady, and full of unspoken forgiveness. She could feel how fragile he had become. His hand was cold, trembling slightly. She wanted to tell him how much he mattered, how much his quiet strength had inspired her through the darkest times. But words seemed too small for the emotions that filled the space between them. So she just sat there, quietly, letting silence do the talking. The clock ticked on. Every second was a memory. She remembered their laughter on set, the silly arguments, the way he always helped the crew before himself. He remembered her warmth, her gentle humor, and how she always noticed when he was hiding behind his calm face. Years had passed, but some bonds never faded. Then Sandra spoke again, her voice soft but steady. "You always took care of everyone, Keanu. Maybe it's time someone took care of you." He looked at her, his eyes full of disbelief and emotion. No one had said that to him in a long time, maybe ever. His lips trembled, and this time he couldn't stop the tears. They rolled down slowly, tracing the lines of a man who had seen too much loss, too much love, too much life. She didn't look away. She let him cry. That was the moment his guard finally broke. The walls he had built over years of pain began to crumble. For once, he didn't hide behind quiet smiles or polite nods. He allowed himself to be real, to be vulnerable, to be human in front of the one person who always understood without asking questions. The nurse entered briefly, saw them, and quietly stepped back out. There was something sacred about that silence, something too powerful to interrupt. Sandra stayed by his side as the light changed from gold to soft gray. She told him about the world outside, about friends who still asked about him, about the sunset she saw the night before that reminded her of peace. Keanu listened quietly, feeling warmth return to his chest with every word she spoke. And then, when the evening breeze touched the curtains, she said something that made his heart stop. "Do you remember what you told me years ago?" she asked. "You said if we ever drift apart, life will find a way to bring us back." He nodded slowly. "I remember," she smiled faintly. "Maybe life just kept its promise." His eyes filled again, this time not from sadness but from gratitude. He squeezed her hand gently, holding it as if afraid it would disappear. For the first time in months, he smiled, not the polite smile for cameras, but a real one, born from the soul. The machines kept beeping softly. The world outside kept moving. But inside that small hospital room, something began to heal. Not just his body, but the part of him that had forgotten what it felt like to be loved without condition. As night fell, Sandra leaned back in her chair, still holding his hand. She looked at him sleeping peacefully, his chest rising and falling in quiet rhythm. For the first time in a long while, he looked at peace. And just when she thought he had drifted into deep sleep, his lips moved faintly. "Thank you," he whispered, her eyes filled with tears. "You don't have to thank me," she said softly. "Just get better." But Keanu wasn't done. His voice was faint, but his words carried the weight of a lifetime. "There's something I never told you," he murmured, before sleep pulled him under. Her heart skipped a beat. She looked at him, waiting for more, but he had already fallen silent. The monitors beeped gently, and his breathing slowed into calm rhythm. Sandra sat there, her hand still in his, her heart full of questions and emotions she couldn't name. The night deepened outside the window, wrapping the hospital in silence. And in that silence, two souls who had once walked different paths found themselves standing at the edge of something they didn't yet understand. But she knew one thing for sure. Tomorrow, everything would change. The words left unspoken. The hospital room was still half dark when morning light began to slip through the blinds. Soft rays touched the metal rails of the bed, reflecting onto Keanu's face. He looked peaceful, but something about his expression hinted that his dreams were not. His fingers moved slightly, like he was trying to hold on to something invisible. Sandra had fallen asleep on the chair beside him, her head resting on her folded arms. She had been awake the whole night, listening to the rhythm of the monitors, afraid to close her eyes in case he needed her. The sound of a nurse entering gently broke the silence. Sandra lifted her head, her eyes heavy with exhaustion. She straightened herself and whispered, "Is he okay?" The nurse smiled kindly and nodded. "He slept through the night." "That's a good sign," she said softly. "You should get some rest, too." Sandra thanked her, but her eyes never left him. Rest could wait. She had waited years to be here again. A few more hours meant nothing. Keanu's eyes opened slowly. For a moment, he didn't know where he was. The light, the machines, the soft hum of air conditioning, it all felt unreal. Then he saw her. She was sitting exactly as she had been when he closed his eyes. The sight made something deep inside him ache. Not with pain, but with a quiet gratitude that words couldn't describe. "You stayed," he said, his voice still weak but sincere. She smiled gently. "You talk in your sleep, you know," she replied. "I was making sure you didn't reveal any secrets." He chuckled softly, and it felt strange after so long. Laughter had become a stranger to him lately. "Did I?" he asked. "Almost," she said with a teasing look. "You said there was something you never told me." The words hung in the air between them. His smile faded a little. He remembered saying it, though the memory felt half like a dream. He looked away, staring at the small plant by the window that someone must have left to brighten the room. Silence stretched between them again, not uncomfortable but heavy. "I don't remember everything," he said after a pause. But maybe I meant it. Then tell me now, she said softly. He hesitated. The truth was not something simple. It wasn't a confession of love or regret. It was something deeper, something that had lived inside him for years, quietly shaping how he saw the world. He took a deep breath. I used to think, he began slowly, that people like us, who live in front of cameras, can't have real connections anymore. Everything becomes a performance. Even kindness starts to feel like a scene. But then you never played a part. You were just you, and that changed how I saw everything. She looked at him quietly. His words carried weight, not the kind meant to impress, but the kind born from years of silence. You always saw me better than I saw myself, she said after a moment. But maybe that's why we lost touch. We both got scared of being seen too deeply, he nodded. Maybe, he said. Life moves fast, too fast. For a moment, they just sat there, two people caught between memory and reality. The years had changed them, but the core of their bond had not. It was still built on understanding, quiet laughter, and the rare comfort of not having to explain themselves. A gentle knock interrupted them. The doctor entered, flipping through his chart. Good morning, Mr. Reeves, he said cheerfully. How are we feeling today? A little better, Keanu replied, forcing a faint smile. Good to hear, the doctor said, checking the monitors. Your recovery will take time, but you're healing. No more skipping meals, and no more disappearing to remote filming locations without rest, Sandra smiled. I'll make sure of that, she said. The doctor chuckled. Then he's in good hands, he replied before leaving. After the doctor left, Keanu looked at her. You really don't have to babysit me, he said gently. Maybe not, she said, but I want to. There was something so steady in her tone that he couldn't argue. She wasn't here out of guilt or sympathy. She was here because she cared. Because even after years of silence, the bond they shared hadn't disappeared. It had only gone quiet. Hours passed. They talked about small things, the kind of things that made time move slower in a good way. She told him about her kids, about her home by the hills, about how she started painting again. He listened like every word was sunlight, warming the cold corners of his heart. He told her about the quiet days when he just rode his bike until he got lost, and how sometimes being lost felt safer than being found. You ever think about those days? He asked suddenly. The ones we spent on set, the jokes, the mistakes, the way everyone thought we were secretly in love? She smiled. We didn't really help that rumor, did we? He laughed softly. No, we didn't. Maybe because part of it wasn't entirely untrue, she said without hesitation. He looked at her, surprised. Her tone wasn't playful. It was honest, raw, and calm. She looked back at him, unafraid of the silence that followed. I cared for you then, she continued quietly. Maybe in ways I didn't even understand at the time. His throat tightened. And now? He asked softly. Now, she said, I still do. He didn't know what to say. Her honesty felt like sunlight breaking through fog. All the emotions he had buried under work, grief, and quiet solitude rose to the surface. His eyes met hers, and for a moment, the years between them vanished. There was no fame, no distance, no pretending. Just two people sitting in a hospital room realizing that some connections never fade, no matter how much time passes. A soft sound from the hallway drew their attention. A group of fans had somehow gathered near the hospital entrance, holding flowers and letters. The nurses were trying to keep things calm, but one little girl managed to slip through. She was no older than 10, holding a small drawing of Keanu standing beside a dog. Is that her? Sandra whispered, watching as the girl peeked through the door. Keanu smiled faintly. Yeah, he said softly. She's been writing me letters. She lost her father last year. I met her once at a charity event. She said my story helped her feel less alone. He asked the nurse to let the girl in for a moment. She entered shyly, holding out her drawing. I wanted to give you this, she said quietly. He smiled and took it carefully, his hands trembling slightly. Thank you, he said. This means a lot. The girl smiled, then looked at Sandra. Are you his friend? She asked. Sandra smiled warmly. Yes, she said. A very old one, the girl nodded. He's lucky. My dad used to say real friends don't leave when you're hurt. Those words hit both of them like a soft echo of truth. The girl left soon after, leaving behind a silence filled with meaning. When she was gone, Sandra turned to him. "She's right," she said softly. "Real friends don't leave." He looked at the drawing again. Something inside him shifted. All the pain, the exhaustion, the loneliness, they didn't vanish, but they felt lighter, like something inside him had finally started to heal. Evening came slowly. The sky outside turned deep orange, and the light in the room grew softer. Sandra stood by the window, watching the sun sink behind the city. Keanu looked at her, and the quiet between them felt sacred. "There's something I need to tell you," he said suddenly, his tone serious. She turned, sensing something different in his voice. "What is it?" she asked. He hesitated, his eyes drifting toward the floor. "That thing I never told you," he said quietly. It wasn't just about gratitude. It was something more. Her heart began to race. "Keanu," she whispered, "what do you mean?" He opened his mouth to speak, but just then a sudden pain crossed his face. He pressed his hand to his chest, his expression tightening. The monitor beside him began to beep faster. Sandra rushed forward, panic in her voice. "Keanu, what's wrong?" He tried to speak, but his voice came out faint. "It's okay. Just a sharp pain." The nurses rushed in, followed by the doctor. Sandra was pushed gently aside as they surrounded him. Her heart pounded as the sound of medical instructions filled the room. The monitor kept beeping, fast and uneven. She stood frozen, tears welling in her eyes, watching helplessly as the man who had just started to open his heart was now fighting for breath. And just before the door closed behind the medical team, Keanu looked at her through the crowd, his lips moving silently. She couldn't hear the words, but she knew exactly what he said. Her heart broke as the sound of the machines filled the air once more. Night of silence, the sound of rushing footsteps echoed through the hallway. Nurses hurried past with machines, wires, and whispered urgency. Sandra stood frozen outside the room, her heart pounding so loud she could barely hear the voices inside. Every beep, every shout of the doctor's instructions pierced through her like a knife. She wanted to go in, to hold his hand, to tell him not to leave, but she couldn't. They had closed the door. She pressed her back against the cold wall and tried to breathe. Her fingers trembled as she clasped them together, whispering prayers she hadn't said in years. The memory of his last look haunted her. The way his lips had moved, slow and certain, before the pain took him. She didn't need to hear the words to know what they were, but still, her heart refused to believe them. She wanted to hear them out loud, to know that what she had felt all along wasn't just hope. The nurse came out after what felt like hours. Her face was calm but serious. "He's stable now," she said quietly. "The pain was intense, but we managed it. He's resting." Sandra exhaled deeply, covering her face with both hands as tears rolled down her cheeks. Relief and fear mixed inside her like waves crashing together. "Can I see him?" she whispered. The nurse nodded. "He's sleeping, but you can sit with him." Sandra walked into the room quietly. The lights were dim now, the air colder. Keanu lay still, an oxygen mask resting gently on his face. His skin was pale and his breath came slow but steady. The monitor beeped rhythmically beside him, marking time that felt borrowed. She sat beside him, her heart still heavy, her eyes fixed on his face. She reached out and touched his hand, the same hand that had once carried so much strength and now felt fragile under her fingers. "You scared me," she whispered. "Don't do that again." The silence answered her. She leaned back in the chair, exhaustion finally catching up. Every part of her wanted to stay awake, but her body couldn't fight anymore. She watched him for as long as she could, until the room blurred and her eyes closed. The night stretched long and quiet. Outside, rain began to fall, soft at first, then heavier, hitting the windows like the sound of 1,000 heartbeats. Inside the room, only the monitor kept rhythm, steady and alive. It was almost like the world was holding its breath with her. Sometime past midnight, a soft voice stirred her awake. "Sandra." Her eyes opened immediately. Keanu was looking at her, weak but conscious. His eyes were tired, but there was a faint smile on his lips. "You're still here," he said quietly. Of course I'm here, she said, standing quickly. You didn't think I'd leave after that, did you? He gave a faint laugh. You always were stubborn. Someone had to be, she said, brushing his hair gently from his forehead. How do you feel? Like I got hit by a truck, he said softly. But I'll survive, she smiled, tears threatening again. Don't joke like that, she said. He looked at her for a long time, then sighed. I meant what I tried to say before, he said slowly. I just didn't get the chance to finish. You don't have to, she said, squeezing his hand. You need rest. No, he whispered. I need you to hear this. His voice was weak, but steady enough to hold her attention. All these years, he said, I thought distance would protect the good memories we had. I thought if we didn't get too close, we wouldn't lose each other the way we lost so many others. But I was wrong. Distance doesn't protect anything. It only builds walls. She felt her throat tighten. Keanu, she whispered, you don't have to explain. He shook his head. Yes, I do. Because when I said there was something I never told you, it wasn't just about friendship. I cared about you, more deeply than I ever allowed myself to admit. And I still do. The words hit her harder than she expected. For a moment, she couldn't breathe. She looked into his eyes and saw no performance, no hesitation, just truth. She sat down slowly, her hands trembling. Why didn't you ever tell me? She asked quietly. Because, he said, his eyes soft with pain, you deserved peace. And I didn't have any to give. A tear escaped her eye. And you think I did? She asked, half smiling, half crying. You weren't the only one who was scared. He looked surprised. You too? She nodded. I used to think about it, about us, about what could have been. But we both kept choosing silence. We were so careful not to cross any lines that we ended up drawing them too deep. He smiled faintly. That sounds like us. Yes, she said softly. That's us. The rain outside grew louder. Thunder rolled in the distance, echoing through the empty hallways. She reached for his hand again and held it tighter. You're not going to disappear again, are you? She asked. Not if you promise to keep visiting, he said with a tired smile. You have my word, she said. A nurse came in to check his vitals, smiling politely when she saw Sandra sitting there. You're good for him, she said quietly. He's calmer when you're around, Sandra smiled faintly. He always pretends he's calm, she said. But he feels everything deeply. The nurse nodded knowingly and left the room. Keanu's eyes were half closed now, his strength fading. Do you remember that day on set? He murmured. When we were filming the last scene and I missed my cue? She smiled. You mean the one where you tripped over the camera cable? He chuckled weakly. Yeah, that one. How could I forget? She said. You fell so hard everyone thought you broke something. And then you just stood up, smiled, and said, I'm okay. He smiled. You laughed so hard you couldn't finish your line. She laughed quietly, the memory warming her heart. Those were good days. He nodded slowly. We should have more of them. The clock ticked on. The storm outside began to fade into gentle rain again. Sandra sat by his side until dawn began to break once more. When she stood to stretch, she noticed the small drawing the little girl had given him lying on the bedside table. She picked it up and smiled. The picture showed him standing tall beside a small dog, the sun shining behind them. But now, looking closely, she noticed something new. In the corner of the drawing, the little girl had written 2 words. Never alone. Sandra felt tears fill her eyes again. She placed the drawing gently back on the table and looked at him. She's right, she whispered. You're not alone anymore. He opened his eyes just enough to hear her. Neither are you, he said softly. Her breath caught. She sat again, holding his hand in both of hers. Rest now, she whispered. I'll be right here. As the light grew brighter, he closed his eyes peacefully, his breathing steady. She watched him for a long time, letting the morning calm wrap around them both. The world outside was waking, but inside that room, time felt like it had stopped just long enough for 2 souls to finally find the peace they had been running from for years. But peace, she would soon learn, was only temporary. Later that morning, as she stepped out to get some coffee, her phone buzzed. It was a call from his manager. His voice was trembling. Sandra, he said, we just got the test results back from his scans. There's something the doctors didn't tell us yesterday. Her heart froze. What do you mean? She asked, her voice trembling. There's more, he said quietly. And it's not just exhaustion. The hallway spun around her. She felt the walls closing in as her fingers went cold. She looked back toward the room where Keanu was resting peacefully, unaware of the storm about to come. The truth behind the silence, the coffee in Sandra's hand had gone cold. She stood in the quiet hospital corridor, her phone pressed weakly to her ear, listening to the voice on the other side. Every word from Keanu's manager felt heavy, distant, unreal. She could hear him speaking, explaining things in careful tones, but her mind refused to accept any of it. Her heart was racing too fast, her breath shallow. I don't understand, she whispered. You said it was just exhaustion. The manager sighed softly. That's what the doctors thought at first, he said. But the scans from last night show something else. There's a shadow on his chest near his lung. They're running more tests to confirm what it is. Her grip on the phone tightened. A shadow? She repeated, her voice shaking. What does that even mean? They're not sure yet, he said quietly. But it could be serious. They didn't want to tell him until they had more results. Sandra closed her eyes, leaning against the cold wall for support. She could feel the weight of those words pressing against her chest like a stone. The hospital lights above her flickered faintly, but all she could see was Keanu's tired face, his quiet smile, his soft laughter from the night before. He had finally opened up to her, finally allowed himself to rest. And now this, when will they know? She asked weakly. Later today, the manager said. But please, don't tell him yet. Not until the doctors do. She nodded slowly, though the manager couldn't see her. I understand, she whispered. She ended the call and stood there for a long time, trying to steady her breath. Outside, the morning light was warm and bright, but it felt wrong, too cheerful for what was coming. She wanted to scream, to break something, to demand why life kept testing gentle souls like his. But instead, she wiped her eyes, took a deep breath, and walked back into the room. He was awake, his head turned toward the window. Sunlight poured in, soft and golden, casting a glow over his face. He smiled faintly when he saw her. You disappeared, he said quietly. I thought you finally ran away. She forced a small smile. I don't run from friends, she said. Never have. He looked at her curiously. You okay? He asked. You look pale. Just tired, she said quickly. The coffee wasn't great. He nodded, accepting the lie, though a part of him seemed to sense there was more. You've always been a bad liar, he said with a faint smile. She sat beside him, her heart heavy. Maybe I'm just out of practice, she replied softly. The next few hours passed quietly. They watched the city from the window, the cars moving like slow rivers of light below. Nurses came and went, checking his vitals, adjusting wires. He looked better, but she couldn't stop seeing what she now knew. The thought of that shadow, the possibility of what it could mean, kept replaying in her mind. She wanted to reach out and fix it, to take it away from him somehow, but she couldn't. Do you ever think about fate? He asked suddenly, breaking the silence. All the time, she said softly. Why? He shrugged gently. Sometimes I think everything that happens, good or bad, brings us where we need to be. Even this, he said, glancing at the IV tube in his arm. Maybe I needed to stop running. Her throat tightened. You were never running, she said quietly. I was, he replied. Not from people, but from feelings. From stillness. Every time I slowed down, the memories caught up. So I just kept moving. She looked at him, her eyes soft. And now that you've stopped? He smiled faintly. Now I remember what peace feels like. She turned her face away for a moment, afraid he might see the tears forming in her eyes. His peace came at a price she wasn't ready to face. The world outside looked so normal, yet everything inside this room was shifting, quietly, painfully, beautifully. In the afternoon, the doctor came in. His expression was calm, but his eyes were serious. Sandra felt her stomach twist. Keanu greeted him with his usual kindness. Doctor, he said softly. Good to see you again. The doctor smiled politely. Good to see you sitting up, he said. How are you feeling? Better, Keanu replied. A bit tired, but better, the doctor nodded. Good. We've gone over your tests from last night. I'd like to discuss them with you both if that's all right. Sandra's breath caught. She tried to stay calm, to look normal, but her hands clenched together in her lap. Keanu looked at her, then back at the doctor. Go ahead, he said quietly. The doctor paused for a moment, then spoke carefully. There's a mass near your left lung, he said gently. It's small, but it's concerning. We're not jumping to conclusions yet. We'll need a biopsy to know exactly what it is, but we'll take it one step at a time. The room went completely silent. Keanu didn't speak. His eyes stayed fixed on the doctor, his expression unreadable. Sandra's heart dropped. The confirmation hitting her harder than she expected, even though she already knew. She watched him, waiting for any sign of emotion, but he just nodded slowly. How soon can we do the biopsy? He asked calmly. Tomorrow morning, the doctor replied. You'll need to rest tonight. Thank you, he said, his tone steady. When the doctor left, the silence that followed felt unbearable. The sound of the machines seemed louder now, every beep sharper, every second heavier. Sandra wanted to say something, anything, but the words refused to come. Finally, he spoke, his voice quiet but strong. So that's the truth, he said softly. I guess life's not done testing me yet. Don't say that, she said, her voice trembling. It might not be what we think. He looked at her, his eyes gentle. You knew, didn't you? He asked. She froze. What? You knew before he said it, he said quietly. I saw it in your eyes. She looked down, ashamed. I didn't want to tell you until it was certain. He smiled faintly. You were protecting me, he said. You always do. Someone has to, she said, her voice breaking. He reached out slowly, his hand trembling, and placed it over hers. Hey, he said softly. I'm not afraid. She looked up, tears filling her eyes. How can you not be? He smiled gently. Because I've already lived more than I ever thought I would. Every pain, every loss, every joy, it all brought me here. And right now I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be. She couldn't stop the tears now. They fell freely, silently. He squeezed her hand weakly. Don't cry, he whispered. You're stronger than this. She shook her head. No, I'm not, she said. Not this time. He gave a small laugh, soft and tired. Then we'll be strong together. Night came again, slow and heavy. He had fallen asleep after the nurse gave him medication. Sandra sat by the window, watching the city lights blur into streaks of gold. Her heart felt like a storm, full of everything she wanted to say, but couldn't. She took out her phone and opened her notes. Her hands trembled as she began to type. Dear Keanu, she wrote, if you ever forget how many lives you've touched, I'll remind you. If you ever lose hope, I'll be the one holding it for you. And if you ever get tired, I'll be here until you wake up again. She looked up at him, his face calm in sleep, and whispered, You're not fighting this alone. But as she sat there, unaware, a shadow moved quietly outside the door. It was a nurse holding a sealed envelope, an early report from the lab that had arrived hours ahead of schedule. She slipped it into the doctor's folder, not realizing that inside it held the truth that would change everything. And by morning, the truth would no longer be hidden. The promise before dawn, the hospital was quiet again, the kind of quiet that feels heavier than sound. The hallway lights glowed faintly, and somewhere far down the corridor, a machine beeped in steady rhythm. Sandra hadn't slept all night. She sat by the window, her arms crossed over her knees, watching the rain slide slowly down the glass. Every drop felt like time passing, soft, endless, and uncertain. The doctor had said they'd have the results by morning. But morning felt far away. The seconds dragged. She kept looking at Keanu, lying there asleep, his face calm, his breathing even. She wondered if he knew she hadn't stopped watching over him since the day she walked in. She wondered if he could feel how much she wanted him to be okay. A faint knock broke the silence. The doctor stepped in quietly, holding a folder close to his chest. His face was calm, but his eyes gave him away. Sandra stood quickly, her heart pounding. She didn't need to ask what it was, she already knew. The results were in. Is he awake? The doctor whispered. She shook her head. No, He's resting. The doctor hesitated, then lowered his voice. We confirmed the diagnosis. It's an early-stage tumor. The good news is that it's treatable. Surgery and therapy can help if we start soon. Her breath caught. Treatable? She repeated softly. Yes, he said. It's not too late. For a second, relief flooded her chest, but it was followed quickly by fear. Because treatable didn't mean easy. It meant months of pain, of uncertainty, of more nights like this one. And yet it was hope. Fragile, but real. She glanced at Keanu, still sleeping peacefully, unaware of the storm waiting for him when he woke up. She whispered, Thank you, doctor. We'll talk more in the morning, he said quietly. But be gentle when you tell him. After he left, she sat back down beside Keanu's bed. The word treatable kept echoing in her head. It was a lifeline, but also a test. She reached out, brushed his hair gently, and whispered, You're not done yet. Not even close. Around dawn, Keanu began to stir. His eyes fluttered open, weak but aware. You're still here, he said softly, his voice raspy. Always, she said with a small smile. You really need to stop sounding surprised, he chuckled faintly. Maybe I just like hearing you say it. She smiled back, though her heart was heavy with what she had to say. The doctor came by, she said quietly. He looked at her, reading her tone immediately. You know? He said softly. She nodded. Yes, they got the results. He took a slow breath, his eyes searching hers. Tell me. She hesitated for a moment, then leaned forward, taking his hand in both of hers. It's a tumor, she said gently. But it's early. They can treat it. It's not too late. He didn't move, didn't flinch. His expression was calm, almost too calm. He just nodded slowly, his thumb tracing small circles over her fingers. How long? He asked quietly. They'll start soon, she said. Surgery first, then therapy. He looked at her, his eyes deep with thought. You sound more scared than I am, she smiled sadly. Because I am. Why? He asked softly. Because I just got you back, she whispered. And I'm not ready to lose you again. He looked at her for a long moment, then smiled faintly. You're not going to lose me, he said. I've got things left to do. Like what? She asked, trying to sound steady. He looked toward the window where the first light of morning was beginning to break through the clouds. Like keeping a promise, he said. She frowned softly. What promise? He turned back to her, his expression gentle but full of meaning. Years ago, when everything was falling apart, I told myself that if I ever got the chance to rebuild something real, something honest, I wouldn't run this time. I think that chance is now. Her throat tightened. Keanu! He squeezed her hand gently. You once said real friends don't leave when you're hurt, he said. So if you're not leaving, I'm not either. Her eyes filled with tears again, but this time they weren't from fear. They were from love. Not the kind shouted or written in letters, but the kind built quietly through loyalty, through kindness, through the simple act of staying. The nurse came in a few minutes later to check on him. You're awake early, she said cheerfully. We'll get you ready for the procedure soon. Procedure? He asked softly. Just preparation, the nurse said with a reassuring smile. Nothing to worry about. After she left, Sandra sat back down, trying to stay calm. Keanu looked at her, studying her face. You haven't slept, he said. Neither have you, she replied. He smiled faintly. Maybe that's our new thing, staying awake when the world sleeps. It's not a great habit, she said gently. You need rest. So do you, he said. But you won't take it, she sighed. I'll rest when you're okay. Then we'll both rest, he said, smiling weakly. Deal. Deal, she whispered. Hours later, they wheeled him toward the surgical wing. She walked beside the stretcher, her fingers intertwined with his until the very last moment before the doors closed. He looked up at her and said quietly, Don't wait for me to wake up. Go outside. See the sun. Breathe. I'll be here, she said firmly. When you open your eyes, I'll be the first thing you see. He smiled softly. Then I'll fight harder. The doors closed and she was left alone in the hallway. The next few hours felt like days. She sat on the bench outside the surgical unit, her hands clasped tightly together, whispering to herself again and again that everything would be fine. But inside, every heartbeat carried fear. After what felt like forever, the surgeon finally came out. His face was tired but calm. "The procedure went well," he said. "We removed the mass. He's still weak, but he'll recover." The relief hit her like a wave. She pressed her hands to her mouth and let out a quiet sob of gratitude. "Can I see him?" she asked. "Soon," the doctor said gently. "He's still waking up." When they finally let her in, the room was quiet again. Keanu lay there, pale but alive, breathing steadily. His chest rose and fell in rhythm with the monitor's soft beeps. She sat beside him and held his hand, her thumb tracing the same circles he had made earlier. He stirred faintly, his eyes opening just enough to find her face. His lips curved into the smallest smile. "Told you. I'd fight," he whispered. She nodded, tears falling freely now. "And you won," she said softly. "Not yet," he murmured. "But I'm still here." "That's something." She leaned closer, her voice trembling. "You scared me more than anyone ever has." He smiled weakly. "Then I guess I owe you a promise." "A promise?" she asked softly. "Yeah," he said, his voice faint but certain. "When I walk out of this place, you and I are going somewhere quiet. No cameras, no noise, just peace." She smiled through her tears. "That sounds perfect." "It will be," he said, "because it'll be real." He drifted back into sleep soon after, his hand still in hers. The sky outside had turned a soft golden pink. She sat there watching the light change, feeling something new rise in her chest, something between hope and faith. And yet deep down, she knew the fight wasn't over. The doctor's voice echoed again in her memory. "We removed it, but he'll need therapy. The road is long, but for now she didn't care about tomorrow. For now he was breathing. For now he was alive." She looked at him, her voice a soft whisper in the stillness. "You kept your promise," she said, "and I'll keep mine." But just as she said it, the monitor gave a sudden sharp beep. Then another. The nurse rushed in, calling for assistance. Sandra froze. The light that had just begun to return was suddenly swallowed by panic once again. The light that never fades. The sound of alarms filled the room. Nurses rushed in from every direction. Sandra stood frozen, her heart pounding so violently she could barely breathe. The monitor kept beeping fast, irregular, wild. She tried to move closer, but one of the nurses gently stopped her, whispering, "Please stay back." Her eyes filled with tears as she watched the doctors surround him again. Their voices were urgent but controlled. "Get the line ready," one said. "Increase oxygen," another added. Sandra's body shook uncontrollably. She gripped the wall, whispering prayers under her breath. "Please don't take him now, not now, not after everything." Minutes passed like hours. The storm of movement inside the room slowly began to calm. The beeping steadied, the doctors' voices softened, and finally, one of them turned toward her with a tired nod. "He's stable," he said quietly. "It was just a reaction to the anesthesia. His heart rate spiked, but he's safe now." Her knees nearly gave out. She covered her mouth with both hands as tears of relief rolled down her cheeks. She wanted to thank them, to say something, but her voice wouldn't come out. All she could do was look at Keanu, still, pale, but alive. When they left the room, she moved slowly toward his bed and sat down beside him. Her fingers trembled as she reached for his hand. "You can't keep doing this to me," she whispered, half laughing through her tears. "You're supposed to rest, not give everyone a heart attack." His eyelids fluttered weakly, and after a moment, he managed a faint smile. "I like the attention," he whispered. She laughed softly, her tears falling freely now. "You're impossible," she said. "I know," he murmured. "But you're still here." "And I'll stay," she said, her voice steady now. "Even if you scare me every 5 minutes." He smiled again, eyes closing, his breathing soft and even. The machines hummed quietly, the sound of life steady in the background. She sat there for hours, holding his hand, watching the slow rhythm of his chest rising and falling. When he woke again, the sky outside had turned golden. The storm had passed, and sunlight poured into the room like warmth returning to the world. He looked around, disoriented, until his eyes found her again. "You didn't leave," he said softly. "I told you," she said, smiling. "I don't leave the people I care about." He studied her face for a long moment, then said quietly, "You've changed, Sandra." She tilted her head. "How?" "You're calmer now," he said. "Stronger but softer, too." She smiled faintly. "Life does that," she said. "It breaks you just enough to show you what really matters." "And what matters to you?" he asked. She looked at him, her voice low but certain. "Moments like this. People who stay, hearts that heal." He smiled, a deep, genuine smile that reached his eyes. "Then I guess we both finally learned something." The next few weeks passed slowly but gently. Keanu stayed in the hospital for his recovery, and Sandra never missed a day. She read to him, brought him small gifts, told him stories from old sets, and made him laugh until the nurses told them to quiet down. They became the hospital's calm center, a small world of warmth in the middle of white walls and quiet machines. Sometimes they didn't speak at all. They just sat in silence, watching the world outside the window. Silence no longer felt heavy. It felt safe, full, alive. One morning, the doctor came in with a soft smile. "The therapy's working," he said. "Your recovery is ahead of schedule. If things continue like this, you'll be discharged soon." Keanu smiled faintly. "That's the best thing I've heard in a long time." "You earned it," the doctor said kindly. "But take it slow." After he left, Sandra looked at him. "So," she said softly, "where do you want to go first?" He thought for a moment. "Somewhere quiet," he said. "Where no one knows us. Somewhere we can just be." She nodded. "I think I know the place." A week later, he walked out of the hospital, weak, slower than before, but walking. The cameras tried to follow, but Sandra shielded him, smiling politely as they slipped into a car waiting outside. For the first time in months, he breathed air that wasn't filtered through machines. He closed his eyes and let the sunlight hit his face. "Feels different," he said softly. "It's freedom," she said. They drove for hours, leaving the noise of the city behind. Hills rolled in the distance. The sky stretched wide and endless. They stopped by a quiet lake, surrounded by trees and golden light. The water was still, reflecting everything like a mirror. Keanu stepped out slowly, leaning on a cane the nurse had given him. Sandra walked beside him, careful but smiling. They stood together by the edge of the water, watching the sunlight shimmer on the surface. "Remember when we filmed by a lake years ago?" he asked softly. She smiled. "Yeah. You pushed me in." He laughed quietly. "You dared me to." "You still did it," she said, nudging him gently. "And you forgave me," he said. She looked at him, her eyes soft. "I always would." The wind moved gently through the trees, carrying the sound of water and distant birds. Keanu looked out at the lake, his voice thoughtful. "You know," he said, "I used to think healing meant forgetting. But now I see it's the opposite. Healing is remembering without pain." She nodded. "And loving without fear." He turned to her, his eyes full of quiet emotion. "You saved me," he said softly. "No," she whispered. "You saved yourself. I just reminded you who you were." They stood in silence again, watching the light change. The sun dipped lower, painting the world in gold and rose. He reached out, gently taking her hand. "Thank you," he said. She smiled. "For what?" "For coming back when I needed you most." She squeezed his hand gently. "You would have done the same," he smiled faintly. "Maybe life really did keep its promise," he said. "Remember what you told me? That it would bring us back?" She said. He nodded. "It did." The last rays of sunlight touched the water, turning it into a sheet of light. They stood there, two old souls who had seen too much, lost too much, but still found a way to smile again. No words, no scripts, no cameras, just truth. As they walked back to the car, Sandra glanced at him and said softly, "You know, when people talk about you, they always call you the kind one, the humble one. But they don't know the whole truth." He smiled. "And what's that?" That you're also the brave one, she said. The one who never stops believing. He looked at her, his voice soft. You make it easy to believe, she smiled. Then keep believing. Months later, the world moved on, as it always does. But somewhere in the hills near that quiet lake, two friends still visited every year on the same day. They would sit by the water, talk about life, and laugh about how strange and beautiful it all was. And sometimes, when the wind blew just right, it carried their laughter across the still surface of the lake, a sound soft enough to disappear, but strong enough to stay in the heart. Because some connections, no matter what life brings, never fade, they just change form, turning into light.